Welcome back to Getting Started Recording with Reaper. In the last video, we looked at mapping out our song using regions and markers, and this video is going to be all about drums, how to get them into your project, especially if you're not a drummer. I'm going to be using a plugin called TuneTrack Superior Drummer 3, but there's a lot of options out there from free to paid. Also, I'm going to assume that you know very little or nothing about virtual instruments when we go through this video. But if you do already and you're familiar, go ahead and use the timestamps and jump ahead. In this video, you will learn what is MIDI, what are virtual instruments, drum virtual instruments and what they do. And for this reason, we'll spend a good portion of our time walking through the main screens of TuneTrack Superior Drummer to help you become familiar with what you can get in a drum virtual instrument and how to use it in your mix. And finally, we'll find our specific groove and add it to our song. So let's get started. To understand how virtual instruments like TuneTrack work, it's helpful to have a basic understanding of what MIDI is. MIDI, which is short for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, is a standard that allows various electronic instruments like keyboards to communicate with devices like computers. Sometimes we associate MIDI with low quality or older computerized music. However, unlike the audio we previously recorded, MIDI has no sound. Instead, it's more like a message or a command that says, play this note, this loud, and for this duration. This message is received by a device that knows how to interpret that command and associate it with a library of sounds. The sound could be a piano, strings, or even percussion. Think about a digital keyboard. There are no physical hammers hitting strings. Instead, when you press a key, it's sending a digital message or command to an internal sound bank made of multiple samples. And a sample is basically a recorded sound, such as someone playing middle C on a piano. This MIDI message is communicating which sample within the larger library should be played, which translates to what you hear in your speakers or headphones. Ultimately, the quality of the sound has nothing to do with MIDI, but is determined by the quality of the recorded samples. Since MIDI does not contain any sounds, MIDI files and messages can be sped up and slowed down without affecting audio quality. They only affect how fast the messages are being transmitted to the device or system containing the samples to be triggered. We're just barely scratching the surface with MIDI, but just remember that MIDI does not contain audio. Instead, it is a message protocol that communicates what note to play, how loud to play it, and for how long. At the most basic level, virtual instruments are the sound libraries that can be triggered by MIDI. They can be added to your project as a plugin, just like the EQ and delay we added in previous videos. Some virtual instruments are designed to work inside a third-party host like Native Instruments Kontakt Player, and for these you would add Kontakt as the plugin on the track in your project, and then load the sound library within Kontakt, similar to launching a media player and loading an MP3 file. Others are designed to work as independent plugins that can be loaded directly onto the track without the need for a third-party host. Today, the quality of sounds from many virtual instruments are so realistic that it's often difficult to distinguish a recording using virtual instruments from a recording using a real musician in a studio tracking to the song. There are three main uses for virtual instruments. First, you can use them in place of a real musician for a studio production. Second, you can replace selected hits and notes of a real recording. For example, a real drummer could play on the album, but you may want to swap out his kick drum for a virtual instrument kick because it fits the mix better. And third, virtual instruments are a powerful tool for the writing phase, regardless if you choose to record a real musician during the production track phase of the project. They are invaluable because they allow you to write and record a full band demo without having a full band. In this video, we'll look at using a virtual instrument called TuneTrack Superior Drummer to get our drums into the song. There are 5 considerations when choosing a virtual instrument. The first is the quality of the sounds. How close does the virtual instrument sound to a real musician? And are the sounds convincing? Second is the size of the library. The more intricate the library, the larger it will be. For example, Toontrack's flagship Superior Drummer 3 requires about 230 gigabytes of hard drive space, while Easy Drummer 2 from Toontrack only requires about 4 gigabyte as the drum sounds are largely pre-processed. Third are workflow considerations, which is equally as important as the first two. Some virtual instrument plugins come with pre-recorded MIDI grooves that can be used to build your drum and bass lines. An efficient workflow helps you to quickly find the grooves that are right for your song and build your drum track. If you do not plan on triggering the drum sounds by electronic drums, a keyboard, or pad controller, then this groove discovery workflow is an important consideration. Fourth, what is your goal? Are you only wanting to use virtual instruments for the purposes of creating a demo, or do you want to use them in the production tracks that ultimately get released to the public? And fifth, what is your budget? Superior Drummer 3 will set you back about $400 at the time of this video, while their lighter version, Easy Drummer 2, currently runs about $150. And there are free options out there as well, but ultimately you're going to get what you pay for. That said, holidays are a great time to look for sales, especially around November and December. If I recall, I think I saw Easy Drummer on sale for about $79 this past winter. Like I mentioned, Toontrack Superior Drummer is one of many drum plugins available. I have used their products for more than a decade, and I also use their Easy Bass and Easy Keys products. So since I'm most familiar with their products, that's what we're going to be using in this and future videos. Further, while I'm using the flagship Superior Drummer 3, all of the concepts in this video apply to Easy Drummer as well. We're about to walk through the main functions within Superior Drummer, but I want to be clear that you don't need to master each of these just to use the plugin. In fact, you could load up a default preset and select your groove and go. However, I think you'll find it helpful to see some of the core functionality that you get in a plugin like this. All of Toontrack's plugins can be added directly to a track's plugin folder without the need of a third-party plugin host, so you don't need to download anything else like Contact Player. Let's start by adding Superior Drummer to a new track. To add Superior Drummer, just go to the track's plugin folder and search for Superior Drummer just like we did for EQ and delay in previous videos. When Superior Drummer first loads, you'll see an image of a drum kit which visually represents the sound library. If you're new to virtual instruments, let me provide a little bit of context around the types of sounds you're getting with Superior Drummer 3. The core library was recorded in a professional recording studio with world-class gear by a 4-time Grammy-winning engineer, and it comes with 7 full drum kits, 25 snares, and 16 kick drums, and it's capable of 11.1 surround sound. To add to the realism, each hit was recorded at different dynamic levels ranging from ghost notes to accents, and with right and left stick hits. And to take the realism even further, each dynamic level has multiple samples that play in round robin to simulate the natural variation that occurs when a real drummer hits the drum head. And if you're still uncertain of how realistic a virtual instrument like this is, consider the cons listed in Sound on Sound's review. This will undoubtedly mean less work for real drummers, and you'll have the problem of making everything else in your mix sound as good as the drums. Here are some sample clips from songs I recently mixed using Superior Drummer 3.
That I feel when we're alone. Whoa, whoa, Carolina. I've been trying to find a way to stay with you, but hey, so far away, and I guess I must have better things to do, to where they've never heard or hear. Oh my dear, I gotta get back, ooh, coming back to you, my love. you buried me. You didn't know I was a seed.
Now that we've covered the sounds, let's get oriented to the layout. At the top of the screen, you'll see 4 tabs. We're on the Drums tab where you can select which drum kit you want to use. We'll look at this more in a minute. The Grooves tab is where we can find and add pre-recorded MIDI grooves to our drum part. The Mixer tab is where we can blend the mics for each part of the kit and add EQ, compression, and other effects if needed. And the Tracker tab contains a powerful artificial intelligence tool that can convert the audio of recorded drums to MIDI so you can augment or replace an existing recorded drum track with Superior Drummer sounds. However, we won't be covering that in this project, but it's worth checking out. To the right of these tabs, you can select which drum kit you want to use. As previously mentioned, Superior Drummer comes with 7 different drum kits with multiple presets for each. We're currently using the default Gretsch kit, but let's select the Pearl Masterworks kit. In the main window, you'll see the drum kit we have loaded. You can right-click on any of the drums to see other options available. Or you can also access these options by clicking in the top center of the screen. Let's right-click on the kick drum where we'll find 16 options available. Currently, a 24-inch Pearl kick is selected, but I want something a little snappier, so I'm going to go with the 22-inch. Right-clicking on the snare, you can also see the 25 options you have to choose from, which can be helpful in finding the exact sound that you need for your song. Again, you don't have to go through this level of customization, but it's just helpful to know that these options are here in case you need them. And if you're still wanting more sounds, Toontrack sells add-on libraries of additional kits produced by world-class engineers that have worked with some of the top artists in the world. To the right, you'll see a bunch of settings where you can modify the sounds of each part of the kit. However, that's outside the scope of this video. Finally, on the bottom of the screen is a place where you can drag and drop MIDI grooves to build your drum part. However, when working inside of a DAW like Reaper, my personal preference is to drag these directly to the track and work on them from there. Now that we have a drum sound, let's go to the Grooves tab. This tab contains various pre-recorded MIDI grooves that can be used in your project to trigger Superior Drummer's drum sounds and build your drum track. Superior Drummer 3 comes with more than 1,600 MIDI drum files played by real drummers, covering a broad range of styles, tempos, and time signatures. These files are categorized into song structure such as intro, verse, chorus, bridge, and fills. Like sound libraries, Toontrack offers a wide variety of add-on MIDI grooves for purchase from their website. I also use MIDI grooves from third-party companies like Odd Grooves and Groove Monkey. I recommend following these companies as they often offer great discounts on their MIDI groove packs at key times throughout the year. Down the left side of the screen are libraries of MIDI grooves. Grooves are organized into libraries which have subfolders for styles and then songs. Selecting, for example, New York Allaire will filter the results into subfolders of grooves. You can see that this library includes swing and straight grooves in a variety of time signatures. Let's select 4/4. This brings up 12 different songs played in a variety of tempos, each with performance options depending on whether you're looking for an intro, verse, chorus, or something else. Now let's select Song 1, Cymbal Variations. We now see a list of 6 grooves, each of which are variations on the same pattern. We can audition each pattern by clicking the play button next to each groove. This process works great if you're familiar with each groove library. However, 1,600 files are a lot to navigate. This is why workflow and user experience are so important in choosing virtual instruments. At the top of the window, Superior Drummer has filters that help you narrow down the grooves to what you're looking for. Before we look at the filters, there's an important setting to be aware of. There's a button called Preview and Original Tempo, which allows you to choose whether you want to hear the grooves in the tempo they were recorded in, or the tempo set in your digital audio workstation. For our purposes, let's make sure this is deselected since we already have a project tempo and feel. Now you can select any genre, play style, type of groove like swing or straight, time signature, and even symbol variation to narrow down your library. Another option is the Tap to Find button. This brings up a window where you can enter elements of a drum groove you may be hearing, which then acts as a filter to show results for similar grooves. Just click on the part of the kit you hear to create the groove filter. When finished, click Show Results. The last place we'll look before building the groove for our song is the Mixer tab. This is where we can fine-tune the mix of our drum kit. This is a mixer just like you'll find in your digital audio workstation, and it has a channel for each microphone. For example, you can see that the kick drum has 3 mics and the snare has 2. On each of these tracks, you can add TuneTrack's built-in effects such as EQ and compression. You also have the option to route, for example, the 3 kick mics to a single submix bus where you can process all 3 mics with 1 fader and 1 set of effects. Before we leave the Mixer tab, there's one very powerful thing we need to look at. If you've ever recorded a real drum kit, you know that the hi-hat mic is also picking up the snare. Tom 1 is also in the mic of Tom 2, and so on. To enhance the realism of the drum sounds, Superior Drummer allows you to mix how other parts of the drum kit bleed into each mic, just like what would happen if you were recording a real drum kit. Finally, there are 9 room mics, 3 of which I use for standard stereo mixes. These are Ambient Ribbon, Ambient Near, and Ambient Mid. The others are designed for the more advanced 11.1 surround mixes, but they can also be incorporated into stereo mixes if desired. However, I typically stick to these first 3. To use these, select the channel, and then click the drop-down arrow at the top and select Enable Bleed from all microphones. On the right side of the screen, you can dial in how much of each kit part you want to bleed into the mic. I typically leave these at the default levels, but sometimes you might want to dial back the kick. Okay, enough overview of TuneTrack. Let's get in and start building our groove. For this song, I followed a similar process to identify the groove that I would use. It didn't need to be perfect, but something that was just workable to support the basic idea of what I was hearing. Also, I wasn't concerned about stuff like drum fills at this point. However, I'll add one in this video to show you how to do it. But the big thing right now is that we're still sketching out our song. I ultimately landed on a pattern under an add-on MIDI library called Metal Fusion. I found this pattern under Halftime Swing 4/4, then Chorus, and Variation 2. Let's give it a listen. Metal isn't the term that comes to mind when I hear this groove, which is a great example of why you shouldn't judge a groove library by its title. Always listen to the samples on the company's website and try to picture how they might fit in your own music. I don't write metal music, but I could immediately hear how I could use the grooves in this library. Next, I'll drag and drop that groove into my project. I can then grab the end of it and expand it to where I want it to stop. I can also copy and paste it to other parts of the song that will use this groove. Let's give it a listen. Our scratch tracks are starting to sound like a real song. Before we end this section, let's go ahead and add a fill so you can see how to do this. This particular song in the Groove library has 16 different fill options. After auditioning several of them, I chose fill number 3. Let's drag that into our song. This fill's a lot longer than I need, so I'm going to grab the beginning of it and drag it until I have only the length that I need for the fill. Let's give this a listen. We'll do some more customization when we get to the production tracks, but for right now I think this is sounding pretty good. Before we recap, I'd like to provide a quick comparison of a few of the more popular drum virtual instruments that are out there for every budget level. I have these organized based on price and core functionality included in each. And just to be clear, I fully acknowledge that since I've extensively worked with Toontrack products, I certainly have a bias in how I think about these virtual instruments. However, I think you'll find this to be a good starting point. Further, I don't think there's a bad option on this list. What's important is that you find one that you like and one that fits your workflow. There are many videos online comparing the sounds of these virtual instruments, and I encourage you to go check those out. Also, many of these companies offer demos that you can download to try before you buy. Finally, if you're in the market for a drum virtual instrument, I strongly encourage you to thoroughly read the website for each company you are considering. To be frank, I find some of these websites confusing when trying to understand exactly what you need to buy and the details and features you get. Some of the things that I look for are, can add-on libraries be combined with sounds from the core library, or are they exclusive? Are the drums pre-processed, or do you have access to the raw sampled sounds? If multiple mics were used to record parts of the kit like the snare and kick, do you have access to each mic, or are they pre-blended into a single channel? And how big is the included groove library? And how are the room mics handled, and is there any bleed control? Let's review what we've learned. We began by looking at the basics of MIDI, which are messages or commands that trigger sounds to be played. We then looked at what virtual instruments are and specific use cases in your songs. We also discussed considerations for choosing the best virtual instruments for your needs. And following that, we took a tour through Superior Drummer 3 and listened to some samples. And finally, we found a groove for our song and augmented it with a fill.